Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Faith and Fullness channel. I'm CV.
And I'm Rob Barr.
And also welcome to the second video in our series on reading and understanding the Bible. In this video, we're going to focus on the first of four senses, or four approaches to understanding Scripture, how to read and interpret Scripture, and that is the literal sense.
Yep, and then just so that in case you missed the first video, which we highly recommend you go back and look at that. But if you missed it, the next videos we're going to talk about the allegorical sense, the moral sense of Scripture, and also the anagological sense of Scripture. So stick around for those as well. And again, if you missed the introductory, we highly recommend that you go back and take a look at that.
Yes, and of course we have to give the standard YouTube disclaimer. Love for you to be a part of our channel. So we ask you to like and subscribe and click the notification bell. We will be releasing more videos here soon, the rest of the videos in this series, and more great content to come. So please make sure that you are on top of what we're doing here and participating.
Yes, please do. Please do.
With that,
right.
We're here to kick off with the literal sense, right? So in that introductory video, we gave kind of, an introduction to literal sense. But again, in short, the literal sense in general is when reading a passage, it says what it means and means what it says. Now, to give just a basic overview, right, of the literal sense, we all learn the literal sense, when we first learn how to read, okay? So here are a few sort of fun examples.
Yeah, we start off, my dog Spot, and Spot jumped over the fence and ran into the neighbor's yard. It's a very literal writing. It means what it says, and we should read it that way. We should see that it means exactly what it says.
Right. Here's another one. John owns a dairy farm in Iowa. He currently has 500 cows. So John has a farm and he has 500 cows.
Yeah, it says what it means what it says, right?
Exactly.
So.
And then every Friday night we watch a movie on Netflix, right? So in general, we don't have to spend a lot of time analyzing these sentences, right? Looking for any greater depth in their meaning. They're right to the point, right? Spot jumped over the fence, John owns a dairy farm, and we watch Netflix on Friday evenings.
Yeah,
right?
No great thinking or analysis is necessary. It is what it is, and the information is right there in front of us that we can learn from.
Exactly. However, within, a literal understanding of what you're reading, and as we're going to apply this to Scripture, right? Much of Scripture, Scripture is first and foremost based on the literal sense, and all the other senses we're going to discuss are from or offshoots, right, from the literal sense. Within the literal sense, there are actually a few different types of their categories, you could say, under the literal sense, and that's what we're going to cover here. First, just a brief overview of each or list. Actually, first, we're going to cover what we're calling the literal sense. Then we're going to discuss literal sense as analogy or metaphor, followed by literal sense as using other forms of metaphor or figurative language, and then finally literal sense as hyperbole or like an exaggeration.
Right, which funny enough, when we first say those, one would think, oh no, those don't exist in Scripture, yet they do in abundance and in many different ways. And understanding what that is really important. And understanding the context that the writing is, whatever book we're reading, for example, will help us to know whether we should be looking at this and thinking of it as literally literal versus, say, hyperbole, right? And so we'll give you some examples here in a moment. But starting with literally literal, one example, that is Jesus. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king.
Right, and that means what it says what it means, right? Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea and at the time of Herod.
And there it is. The information is put out there for us, and there's not a lot of analysis necessary.
Exactly. And here's another example. This is from 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 38 through 40. And it reads as follows. Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet on bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David belted on his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he was not used to this now new armor he's wearing. And then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I'm not used to them. And David put them off, didn't want them, discarded them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag or wallet. His sling was in his hand, and that's when he takes off then to face off with the Philistines, or at least that's part of the story here in 1 Samuel.
Yeah, and it's very literal. I mean, there's a lot of information there. There's not too much of that you can read into. He's saying that Saul put the armor on, and David said, "Ooh, I'm not used to this. I don't want to wear it. It's not me. It's not my way of fighting or of moving, and so I'm going to take it off." And it means what it says. It's literal to the passage.
Yeah, did some shopping for military gear, and that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted to go simple.
Exactly.
And it turned out to be very effective, and and the story of David later on. So.
Yeah.
But those are, a couple of examples, again, of just literal. Says, we may repeat this often, says what it means and means what it says, right?
Yeah, yeah. So now we have analogy. What do we think about analogy? Go ahead.
Right. So here's a modern day example, right, of the literal sense as analogy or / metaphor. If you all are familiar with the movie Forrest Gump, there's a famous line from the movie where he says, life is like a box of chocolates, right? You never know what you're going to get. And I'm not going to try to attempt to imitate Forrest Gump, but that is the line. Life is like a box of chocolates, right? Now let's, so in other words, yes, you never know what you're going to get. So life isn't literally, or at least we could say is exactly chocolates, right? You know what you're going to get. But we can still say, in comparing to a box of chocolates, right? And when you purchase a box for the first time, you don't know what all the possible flavors will be or different types of chocolate, right?
Yeah.
And that is still, it's still literally saying, right, that life can come with unexpected, right, happenings. But this is a way of kind of like explaining that life sometimes has unexpected turns.
Right, and that's why that's still a literal sense of this phrase, even though it's using analogy to explain it, right? Life is full of surprises. Life has a lot of good surprises. Might have some surprises that are a little bit sour,
Right, that's right, yeah.
But it's like that box of chocolates, and so it's literal in that we can think of it that way. We can listen to that analogy and connect it to something directly to what it means to our life today or then, right? So Matthew, Matthew chapter 13, verse 31. Let me get to that here. This is the parable of the mustard seed. He put before them, saying, the king of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Certainly that's analogy, right?
Right.
We think of that as analogy. We know that's analogy, and we know it has meaning. How would you?
Yeah, so here's another example of, we take the kingdom of heaven, right? It's not a physical seed, a mustard seed, right? But yet it is, in the analogy, it does. The kingdom of heaven has started small. This is part of Jesus' mission and ministry of explaining of and his purpose and his ministry, and then what eventually will be known as ushering in the kingdom of heaven to grow, right? And based on this relationship with Christ, and ultimately through his death and resurrection. So kingdom of heaven has to start somewhere, right, with something. And so the analogy is to mustard seed. And in this case, kingdom of heaven starts small and can grow, just like as a seed has to grow, it's watered, it has to be nourished, right? Just like our relationship with Jesus Christ. But there can also be troubles along the way, growing pains, entanglements, right? But ultimately it blossoms into something perfect. And that is, right, something, a seed that grows into something, into a plant or a great tree, and then blossoms into something perfect. Again, analogy, but still literally in the sense of our understanding the literal meaning here is that, yes, something that kingdom of heaven starts small and grows into perfection.
Into perfection, right?
Yes. Now we have another example here too, and that's from Luke chapter 8, 16 and 18. And I'm going to grab the Bible here now this time. And I'm going to flip over to Luke 8. And again, 16 through 18. So we have here, no one after lighting a lamp covers it with a vessel or puts it under a bed, but puts it on a stand that those who enter may see the light. For nothing is hidden that shall not be made manifest, nor anything secret that shall not be known and come to light. What do you think about that one, Rob?
You know, I love it because it's this, again, as an analogy, showing this beauty of who we are within Christ, coming to become a light to the world, to reflecting His light. I mean, it just grows into something that is greater than just the straight words that are on the page, right?
Right.
We can take it in our mind's eye and we can expand it into a greater understanding than just those words there, right? Yet it takes those words and transforms them.
Right. So we know that here again, God is not a physical light, right? But we understand a light. What that means is to something what is from darkness and then bring, clarity to darkness or bring brightness, right? Light to dark. And of course we understand this of Jesus being the light. We have other references in Scripture of Jesus being the light, the way, the truth, and the life, and that's in the Gospel of John. But in short, in understanding, like reading this passage, and again, and to Rob's point, so when we boldly receive and live by God's grace, then we become a light that radiates Christ's love, and of course His gospel, and that's what's important understanding of being that reflecting Christ's light, right?
Right. So, I mean, again, just leaving it at the point of understanding the literal sense as analogy, but they're very much connected, as opposed to being a foreign concept or to being, divorced of each other. It gives you these literal words that then have meaning to you directly in your life today, right?
Right. So God literally brings us out of darkness while still not necessarily like a physical light in the material sense, but still a light for us to then be in His grace. Yes.
So then there are other forms of metaphor, though, and other forms of figurative language.
Yep. Yeah, here's another modern day example, right? Other forms of, again, a figurative language. So if you heard the expression like, my heart is broken, right, after some type of loss, it is sad, right? And when you hear something like that, my heart is broken, right? And we understand that there's grieving, like somebody is literally, like if my heart is broken, I'm literally grieving, I'm hurt, I'm upset.
And it means the other person can feel for you.
Right. Exactly.
The words come out and I can then feel for that person who has a broken heart. I can relate to it. I can feel it with them, be empathetic with them.
Yeah, exactly. You feel the compassion, right? But of course, we don't mean that the heart is physically broken, like it's just broken in half. But we do say again that this is where we're, grieving, okay, in the literal sense, right, in a figurative way, but also a wonderful point about then others can feel compassion.
Right.
And we have a couple of examples here too on that, right?
Let's see. Let's find the next example. Let's do John 15. I'm getting ahead here. So John 15, verse 5.
Yes.
And of course, in this, we're talking about Jesus as the vine. And in verse 5, it says, I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Well, that's a beautiful analogy, right? But it's an analogy that we know we are not literally branches. We're not literally going to grow little grapes off of us, right? We know, we understand that, we know that, but we can see in our mind the words and we can immediately attach that to a literal understanding within us to say that Christ is the core or the root of this plant that's then going to grow us, and we're going to grow within it. We're going to grow as a family with the other vines next to us, and we're all going to produce fruit together. And we're going to keep producing fruit because we stay on this vine attached to God as a family and keep drawing nutrients from it and growing fruit. We can see this, we can feel this from the words that are literally written here. But it's also not too foreign either. It's something that there's a direct association with who we are and what we can apply to us today, right? So that's that literally metaphorical sense of Scripture.
Yeah, excellent summary. And sort of in short, right? So although we are not physical branches, we literally depend on God's grace, right?
Right.
We rely on Christ, right, to be in his grace. We got another example here too, and this is from the Gospel of Mark. I'm going to take the Bible over here again. Our handy dandy large print Bible. It always helps, as my eyes are not growing younger. And in chapter 9, 48, I was almost there. Yep, got it. In 48, yes. So where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Again, I'll read that again. Where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Okay, so we're now in this description, Jesus is talking about hell. Okay, right? So what is he referring to there? Is he talking about, again, physical worms, right? And if we're in hell, where they're there and they can endure hell, or brace that, right? Or the fire is not, again, quenched. Are we understanding that as far as a physical fire? Here again, this is actually just a reference to hell, how Jesus is describing hell, and ultimately that it's referring to eternal damnation.
Right. And using this idea, this metaphor of worms, well, most people have probably seen rotting food, right? Yeah. And the fact that there may be worms that are there eating through it. Well, nobody wants to be that piece of meat or that person that's being sort of chewed on like that. And so, again, I think it's a really interesting way of metaphorically attaching these things to an understanding that we can take today from the words that are on the page.
Right, paints a pretty strong picture there too, right? But then Jesus is trying to give the, really a clear understanding of, again, being eternally separated from God, right?
Right. Do you want to go through that?
Do you really want to go through that, right? Do you want to be out of God's friendship forever, eternity?
Right.
It doesn't sound like a good plan to me.
No.
So finally, we have a literal sense as hyperbole or exaggeration, right?
Yeah, this is crazy. I love hyperbole sometimes.
Yeah,
when I'm
fun.
when I'm talking with my kids, sometimes it is the best way to get a point across. Sometimes,
Right. In fact, here's another another good modern day example. Like if you've ever gone to the doctor and had to wait for quite some time, right, to see your provider. Like I waited forever at the doctor's office today, right? Well, you didn't wait, right? Forever, physically forever.
You obviously not. You're there talking to him.
You're there talking, right? So, but to give the point, it's an exaggeration, right? And we hear it all the time. And in fact, we do see some in Scripture, which is one of the why Scripture is so fascinating for so many reasons, right?
Yeah. So let's look at one. Let's look at Matthew chapter 5. And what's the verse?
29 to 30, 5, 29 to 30.
All right. Okay. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and throw it away. It is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into Gehenna, into hell. Nobody wants that.
No.
Right?
This is an interesting one because this can come up in conversations for those of you who are pretty familiar with Scripture. Like, Jesus, what? He's suggesting that what? We physically chop off body parts and, right? But he's actually talking about, in the literal meaning now, but he's exaggerating a way of saying, right, be pure and true to yourself, right, and that we need to purge ourselves from sin.
And purge
we don't want to have a
ourselves,
sinful
right.
life, right?
Yeah,
Please.
have the discipline to set aside whatever it is that's going to cause you to sin. Have the discipline to move it aside. Cut that off. Get rid of it, right? Don't go to that location where you might see things that are going to lead you to sin. Don't, buy that thing from the store that then you're going to have in the house and then maybe want to indulge in too much, right? Whatever it is. All of these things are there within that text to tell us, push it aside.
Right.
Don't keep it around you if it's going to cause you to sin. But what it's not is actually pluck out your eye.
Right. Yes.
Right. But it is this perfect example. This is a very good example of exaggeration, and I am sure that my youngest kids use that a lot sometimes.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Yeah, they
they're
do.
like,
Yeah,
oh, this horrible thing happened.
I like
to them.
that one,
And they
yeah.
make it sound so dramatic, and so sometimes they take it a little too far. But Scripture does it, and as we would expect it to do, without the excessiveness, and actually get right to the point and drive it home to understand it. Things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not just hyperbole in a sense that it's irrelevant. He does it exactly at the right time and in exactly the right way.
Yeah.
That if our minds are open to understanding it, we can get a lot out of that text.
Absolutely. In fact, we have another example here too, also from the Gospel of Matthew, and that's Matthew 23, chapter 23, verse 6 and 7. And since we're already in Matthew, I can just quickly flip over to Matthew 23. And again, this is 6 and 7, right? Yes, here we go, right here. And they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and salutations in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by men. So in this passage in Matthew, right, Jesus is referring to the Pharisees, and he's pointing out their flaws of being hypocrites, right? And so he wants to exaggerate this a bit to make the point, right, of how the Pharisees have fallen into kind of their own egos and right, and living kind of being religious hypocrites, right?
Right. And that doesn't mean that the Pharisees didn't sometimes sit in places of honor, right? If you invited them over, they might sit in places of honor. But this is an example where it's being exaggerated. It's being pushed to a point that we, in our mind's eye, can understand this sense of, what was the word that you used? Of really just taking it too far and being hypocritical about who they are in their position. It's okay to have people who are in positions of authority.
Right.
It's not what we're talking about here. He's taking this to this exaggerated sense and making it more clear to us in that text as to the sinfulness of others and the sinfulness of people who may be in authority that we have to watch out for. Right?
Yeah, this is important to extra stress about authority figures because they do have their place. We talk about in the introduction video about authority, the need for authority and helping to read and understand Scripture and interpret it correctly, right? And that also includes those within the Christian community, within the church, right, who do have an important place, right, an authoritative role. Just as long as it doesn't include being prideful and just that wanting to sin, but then pretending like that you are a good authority.
Right.
Yeah.
But then also not admitting your own faults. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So now we've covered, right, the four types of senses, or under literal, the four categories. We have the literally, literal, the as metaphor, analogy, as other types of figurative language, and then finally as hyperbole and exaggeration.
Yeah.
So I'd like to give you a few points to ponder then, right? And again, as we delve more into reading the four senses of Scripture, including with understanding the literal sense in Scripture, right? So first off, genre matters.
Genre matters. It's like I started to mention earlier. Genre matters. So in certain types of books, maybe a prophetic book, for example, you might it might shape how you're listening to that, how you think of whether it's literally literal versus, say, hyperbole, right? Because there may be a situation in a historical book where it really actually is that bad or really is that exaggerated. But then in other situations, like when Jesus is sitting around talking to his disciples, and you realize, no, that's hyperbole, and it's being used to help us understand a point greater. And so knowing the genre that you're in will also help you to identify the sense of Scripture that's there on the text coming to you.
Right, right. And so in general, right, we could say if we see a book in the Bible that is, say, pretty heavy in metaphor, right? So then that means then the literal sense can have some other angles, including, metaphor, right? And also that kind of expand out some of Rob's points here, right, of looking at genre. So we can have a narrative, we can have a reflection, we can have a myth, we could have a biography, it could, a poetry, right, instructions, a set of instructions, right? Words are good words to live by, right?
Yeah.
And so the Bible is chock full, right, of imagery, analogies, and a lot of the kind of popular expression, see the forest through the trees,
Right.
Context, again.
Context matters.
Big picture points, right? So it also means, too, in reading Scripture, it's important to be resourceful. And, it's okay to ask questions, too, even as we're giving you foundation, right, on how to read and, interpret the Bible, right? It's all right still to, like, if you still struggle, with a particular passage, right, to ask questions, delve deeper, and make sure that we get proper answers under the right authority, right?
That's right. The eunuch was not an idiot. He wasn't dumb.
That's
he wasn't
right, yeah.
ignorant. He would have been a very, very well-educated person, and but still was open to the instructions from Philip.
Yes, yes. So that as we wrap up here, then, with this video and the categories we covered under the literal sense, we're also going to include in the description section several scripture passages for you to look up, and we're going to include also the type of literal meaning in each of those passages, and then encourage you to see in reading those passages if you agree, if you can connect with a passage having metaphor or hyperbole or what, or being literally literal, and again, if you if you also come away with the same interpretation. Right?
Yeah, so we encourage you to take a look at the description, look at that list, go back and read those verses, maybe even expand it a little bit. Sometimes we will give you the limited verses, in other words, really narrow in, but we always encourage you to bring it back a little bit, make sure you get good context. One of the things we never want to imply is that all of the answers are within one or two verses. Usually, it's best to kind of expand it a little bit so that you get the full context. But we encourage you to take a look at that, read those, and look at what we list as the literary sense there, and see where it is or isn't, and contemplate what your thoughts are on it. And feel free to add comments in the comment section about it.
Yeah, we definitely welcome comments and feedback and any questions you may have too. In fact, with that, the next video in our series will be on the allegorical sense, and Rob and I are both looking forward to talking about that one. That's
Love it,
our
yeah.
favorites. In the meantime, we hope you enjoyed this video on the literal sense. Again, please remember to like and subscribe and notify or click the notification bell. Please tell your friends too.
Tell your friends.
Yes, we would love to have more visitors and get your feedback here.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. God bless you. And again, we hope to see you next time.
Thank you again. God bless.